So we already talked about finding an equation algebraic or an inverse equation algebraically. So if it's in function notation, you guys just want to replace that function notation, that might be f of x or g of x or whatever it might be, with y. And then after you've replaced that with y, the second step, because that's what an inverse is to switch the x and y within your equation. So because your equations always are y equals, not x equals, we just don't want to leave it in that form where you have x equals whatever. Like we want to get it y equals whatever. So after you've switched x and y, you guys want to solve or isolate for your y value. And then the last step is writing your equation in inverse notation. So that's just the little -1 power. It just notes that it's the inverse, not the original. Just proper notation there. So if we look at number 1, it's already in y equals. So we're just going to go ahead right away, switch your x and y, and make it x equals 3, y minus 5. So the steps, just depending on the type of equation you have, are going to be a little different each time. But the process is the same. Switch x and y, attempt to solve for y. So we're going to add the 5 over. Get x plus 5 equals 3y. And then since we've got 3 times y, we need to divide each thing by 3. So we can keep that as one big fraction. X plus 5 divided by 3 equals y. So instead of leaving it as equals to y, we're going to write equals y to the negative first. Just note that that's the inverse, not the original function. So for number 2, same thing. So f of x, just function notation, really just means y. We will start by making it x equals 2/5 y minus 3. And then just attempt to get the y by itself. So like now we've got a fraction, but still that first step will be adding the 3. So x plus 3 equals 2/5 y. And then because of our fraction, I'm just going to multiply both sides by 5. So that will give us 5x plus 15 equals 2y now. And then divide everything by 2. So our final equation, you can write it as one big fraction again, like 5x plus 15 over 2. Or you can write it as 2 separate terms being added together. Either way is fine. But write that as a negative equation. So f to the -1 of x, because you initially had f of x. So again, just that little -1 power notes that it's the inverse, not the original. And remember, you guys can always check your equations too, that they are that reflection over that diagonal x equals y line or y equals x line. So like for the first one, we had y equals 3x minus 5. So if we go into the calculator and we graph that, 3x minus 5, and then the inverse we found. So let's look at that one. So that's your first one. Okay. Now if we graph the second one, x plus 5 divided by 3. So now you guys can sort of see that diagonal reflection there across the y equals x line. So just remember that you guys can always check that if you're unsure that you did find the inverse correctly. But just switch x and y, and then get that new equation solved for y. You want y equals whatever. Write it in inverse notation.